All right, well, it is 12 noon and we've got a whole bunch of amazing things to do today. So we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. And we meet every Wednesday at noon. We have these awesome events on Zoom. If you found it, it's the same link. Don't use it. We have lots of awesome events. The event next week coming up is going to be Cody Walls and her wonderful team over from Counseling Services talking about allyship and anti-racism. We are very excited to have this event next week, but this next event is actually the first of a series of events. If you would like to partake in for anti-racism training and be an ally on campus, you can partake in that. So we're going to be giving out a lot of information about that. Next week's the first one, but then there'll be a sign up for later events that actually happen outside our PD series if you're interested in that. So we're very excited to be able to offer that. We're very indebted to Cody Walls and her team for offering that. So be here next week for that. If you come to enough of these events, you get a professional development certificate if you do a reflection and those kind of things. We've just dropped the link in the chat. And if you do things to advance excellence in teaching all across campus or in your field, maybe even become a TLC fellow. The information is available for there in the chat as well. So that's what we've coming up, that's what we've got doing. But today, we're absolutely excited for Tanya Gonzalez to be here. Tanya Gonzalez is the director of the Teaching and Learning Center, also our associate provost for institutional effectiveness. And she's going to be talking about a very important topic that I know I've been struggling with, which is how to balance rigor with inclusive pedagogy and empathy. So Dr. Gonzalez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Don. And I think we might be getting t-shirts for those fellows, right? Is that right? Is that in the works for those teaching fellows?
Noah and Ashley can talk about that a little bit later today. I don't know. We'll figure that out.
Maybe gold star, like something, so you can walk around campus. Maybe polo shirts. I don't wear polos, but anyway, that's a thought, an idea to think about. All right, so I'm gonna do some sharing of screen a little bit, and then not sharing of screen. So we are going to talk about balancing rigor and inclusive teaching strategies, inclusive pedagogy, and thinking about how we kind of move through that. But I want us to be interactive, so we're gonna pause the screen share and interact as a team. I'm not good at toggling back and forth, but we're still gonna do it, and we're still gonna make this conversation work in some way, shape, or form. But I will appreciate if my technology ever fails, or you can't hear me, or it's just not quite working, just to please Noah, Ashley, somebody yell at me and tell me it's not working. Hopefully we'll be good though. So this topic that folks asked me to share about today is something that we've been talking about in the TLC actually, for a while now. So if you were on last year's talks about bringing Don's piece to bring peace to the classroom, which you started out, right with the pandemic, really, right? Like thinking about developing that and that work, and then thinking about how universal design influences the ways that we create inclusive teaching and inclusive spaces and inclusive coursework. So this is really a conversation that has been happening for a while. And so over this summer, I had the opportunity to keynote the Association of Departments of English chat and did a talk on pedagogies of care, along with my colleague, Libby Rifkin from the Georgetown University, who's also the Department of English and Program Disability Studies, and who is also serving as the Special Advisor for Disability to the Vice President for DEI at Georgetown. And so we came together, and Libby is an expert on universal design for learning. And so she really kind of talked about it was a really great talk, actually. Her talk was about thinking about universal design for learning, but also thinking about what it means for faculty who are engaging in these practices and in these inclusive excellence practices that really, how kind of affects the instructor, as well as how it helps the students. And so it was just a really great talk. And then I was able to brag about some of the things that the Teaching and Learning Center has been doing in terms of caring and encouraging care of our students, and what the effects of that can be in our courses and in our classrooms and for our campus. So one of the questions that arose at this summer seminar that I attended was the question, what about rigor? And so that came up like during the Q&A after we were talking about, just the relationship of disability studies and how it can teach us to be more inclusive in the classroom, and all the kinds of strategies that we've been using since COVID hit to sort of make for a more inclusive classroom, a more accessible classroom, a more inclusive pedagogy. And so, that, and then Dawn and the TLC team, Ashley, Noah, and we were chatting, I think this summer, and before orientations started up, and realized that that's the question that our colleagues have been raising too. What about rigor, right? I can put empathy into my classroom. I can be inclusive. I can be welcoming, but what about rigor? And so this is a question that I realized so my response over the summer during our keynote was that's a false dichotomy, right? So the idea that rigor exists outside of inclusive pedagogy is a false dichotomy. And the reason it makes me a little bit, okay, I'm not gonna say it makes me crazy, it doesn't, but it upsets me a little bit that people think about this as two separate things, because it implies that people who care about inclusive teaching do not teach rigorous courses. And that is false, 100%. So I want to just stop sharing a little bit, and I want to chat with you all about what you think is inclusive teaching. Can you just unmute, and because I can't see all of you again, because what is rigor? I mean, did I ask what is inclusive teaching? I meant, what do you think? Sorry, I meant, what is rigor? How do you define rigor?
I would personally define rigor as the time and effort that is necessary to achieve one's goals.
Okay, I like it.
I think also thinking deeply and profoundly about complex issues and problem solving.
Good. Anyone else? Rigor.
Probably involving assignments that reinforce the material.
Good.
I think there's an element, excuse me, of connection, both with their life experiences, with real world, that comes together with content, with your expectations that has rigor in mind.
Excellence. meeting the expectations of your readers or your professors or of the public, but exceeding those expectations.
Like it. All right.
I think also what it's not is that it's just hard for the sake of being hard.
Thank you, Andy.
Rigor is appropriate challenge with support.
Okay. So,
and for me in the College of Ed, that rigor also has to do with applying theory to practice and explaining that in the classroom.
Good. All right. All right. So I'm sharing screen again. Yes. All right. So the question, what is rigor? Obviously, you all are excellent teachers, excellent faculty and instructors. I think that this idea, right, that it's complex with support, it's excellence, right, and demonstrating that is all really good. I'm a professor in the Department of English, and it struck me as I was putting my PowerPoint together, I was like, what does rigor mean? Like, what is the definition, the actual definition of rigor? And I went back to 2007 or 2009, and I made a Wordle. And so I wanted just to show you what the Oxford English Dictionary says about, and I'm for some reason can't move my slides now. Hold on. I'm going to stop share and then I'm going to do this again. Exit, and then I'm going to start share again. But I made a Wordle, and I never make Wordles. It's hilarious that I made a Wordle, but because I hate them. But I made one because it struck me as so interesting that you know, the definition of rigor is harsh inflexibility in dealing with a person or group of people, severity, sternness, cruelty. The second definition is hardness of heart. The third definition is a hostility, harshness, or severity of weather, climate, etc., extremity of cold or hardship or distress. And it's not until you go down to number 6 in the Oxford English Dictionary that you get strict sense or interpretation, precision, which is what Philip was sharing with us. Precision, exactness, right? The quality or condition of being highly detailed, accurate, and thorough. And I was like, okay, right? So it's those things that that I just found it to be very negative. I found it to be very, you know, harsh and strict. And thinking about how that language comes out is important, right? Because I think that when we think about rigor, we want the things that you all talked about, the definition that you all gave, which was to challenge and support, right? To have exactness or approximate excellence, but also encouraging and supporting students and ourselves and our colleagues to achieve those things, right? That it's not just the harsh left by itself. So you all encapsulated it perfectly in terms of how you balance rigor with inclusive teaching. So you already know how to do that because your response to what is rigor embedded the inclusive teaching practices that are so necessary and that we've been talking about and that have been developed since thinking about how disability studies has really affected our disciplines and really kind of contributed to this idea of universal design, and in particular for our profession, universal design for learning. So what is inclusive teaching? I'm just going to keep sharing and I'll just let you all share, even though I can't see all of you when I continue to share. But hopefully you all can see each other on the gallery view. But what is inclusive teaching?
Giving all students the time and benefit for the individual teaching practice, regardless of any orientation or identity. So essentially just treating all students the exact same that you would one another. And I guess just making sure everybody has the opportunities for a successful learning opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. So getting, Andy?
I was going to say teaching for to a diverse group of learners that includes neurodiversity, cultural background diversity, all kinds of experiences, so that you're speaking to, you know, providing a diversity in your curriculum that allows every student to sometimes be challenged and sometimes be like, this is my wheelhouse.
Good. Anyone else want to share? I think like no matter, oh, sorry. Okay. Okay.
This is Lena. I thinking from the perspective of international students, it is not just that you teach to all this whole audience, but also making sure that each student sees a reflection of what goes on in their own life and can apply what you're teaching to their own lives, so they can relate to the content.
Very good. Yeah. So providing people with, you know, what they need, and those are different things, as Andy's response said, right? So those are different things that people need in order to access and to succeed in the materials that you're trying to convey, and teaching people in a variety of different kinds of ways. So There were some other people that were going to respond, and I see some folks in the chat. So let me. Somebody want to read out what's on the chat there for me?
So the point in the chat that Abby Nunes had put out was inclusive teaching is providing all students the opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. Kathy Davidson and Christina Katopoulos, sorry, they have come out with a book. It just came out yesterday, today. I don't remember. I know that the e-version came out yesterday, but that is called The New College Classroom. And but they've been writing articles for a while now on sort of the on inclusive teaching strategies and what is inclusive teaching. And so one of the articles that came out, I believe it was July of this summer, was 10 arguments for inciting learning. I don't know if any of you have read that article. It was in Inside Higher Ed. And it's basically talking about active learning. And so they give 10 definitions of what active learning is, or what active learning does, right? So their argument is that active learning is rigorous. And I'm going to just kind of paraphrase here, but I'm going to read a little bit of some quotes from what they said. But so active learning is rigorous. Nobel Prize winning physicist Carl Wyman notes in his book, Improving How Universities Teach Science, that active learning doesn't just quiz students on the content we teach them, it also affords them the actual strategic learning tools and research methods to dig deeply and to learn better answers for themselves in the classroom and beyond. So when we have colleagues who say sort of, how can you be rigorous, or how can an inclusive classroom be rigorous? I think we've got evidence that shows that active learning works. And in fact, we've got studies that show that active learning works. And active learning is a part of inclusive teaching, right? Because it's getting to encourage your students to really participate in the learning process, and then and get them engaged in different ways that you've provided them the opportunity to do so. So active learning is empowering. It gives students some agency in the classroom. Active learning is effective, accessible, and equitable. So, Davidson says when we redesign the classroom for every student's success, and this is that universal design theory concept, right? When we redesign the classroom for every student's success, we model a more just, democratic, liberatory society and give each student tools to excel. So John said, we have this new certificate happening for how to do an anti-racism, right, certificate. Doing inclusive teaching and inclusive pedagogy and incorporating that into your work is an act of anti-racism, right? It's part of that, making the whole class and the whole experience really recognizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in your and access, right, and individual and intersectional existence in your classroom, into your learning space. Active learning is not a bad word, right? It's something that is definitely people think, when they're teaching that a particular disciplines that they cannot do active learning, right? But they offer up like the think, pair, share is like 2 minutes out of your day, and that produces active learning, right? And structuring other kinds of simple classroom techniques that don't take a lot of time and that cause people to pause and reflect and think in higher level learning kinds of ways is really important, and it's proven to be successful. It works everywhere, not just in courses that are quote unquote thematically inclusive, right? And people always say, oh, well, you can do that because you're teaching an English course, or you can do that because you're teaching American ethnic studies, or you're teaching the psychology of race, or you're teaching this, that, and the other that has this kind of, DEIB component. But no, these practices and these strategies can work for everyone. It encourages metacognition. It's relatable. This is back to Lena, what you said. It's relatable to the world beyond the classroom. So thinking about the skills that people get in active learning that translate to business, their lives in the workforce, right, where they have to collaborate with others. They have to think and problem solve for these kind of greater issues that they have to deal with. So those are the kinds of skills that this active learning is encouraging. Active learning helps us as faculty improve our practices, right? Because we can become more reflective about what works and what doesn't. It creates co-learners. The assumption for an active classroom is that everybody is learning together and we're participating in something as a team. And then it improves the culture for teaching and learning, because if the campus is starting to activate, right, in our teaching and become more active in our work, then we are able to value that, right? Whether you become a TLC fellow or, in our promotion and tenure, if you become award-winning teachers, I guess the question is, how can we be better at K-State for valuing and reinforcing the great work that active learning and inclusive teachers and inclusive classrooms does for the campus. Sorry, I'm just going back really quickly. So in the new college classroom, and I always put new in quotation marks because, like I said, people even here at K-State, right, have been talking about this. I know the SOTL conference, I heard a lot of you talking about the different ways that you can be more inclusive in your teaching, the ungrading. I think, Andy, you presented on that, and some other folks, right, were talking about flipped classrooms and thinking about more creative and active engaged learning. So if you didn't go to the SOTL conference last year, please check out some of those. At least I think we have the program up, so hit up some of those colleagues to kind of get some of those pieces. I think we're going to have a PD on some of them this year. But what the new college classroom suggests is it offers up a sort of guide or a how-to, right, in terms of different strategies for inclusive teaching. And so we've talked a lot about them, the ungrading, they talk about universal design. Well, they talk about a lot of different strategies, so we'll go on. But one of the things I want to point out is that this kind of new classroom, the new university classroom that we're thinking about and that everyone is a buzz about, they're actually incorporating strategies that people have been talking about pre-COVID, right? So the authors Kelly Hogan and Vijay Sathi have wrote an article about inclusive teaching that was published in the Chronicle of Higher Ed in 2018. And so in 2019, I think. Yeah, it was 2019. And in that article, they kind of built this guide, and it's extensive, right? A guide for their idea of inclusive teaching, which are strategies for promoting equity in the college classroom. And what they noticed, and the reason why they started this project, was because what they noticed is that in their own classrooms, and even though they wanted to be inclusive teachers, they noticed DFW rates were demonstrating, when we started to be able to sort of track those DFW rates, and we started to look at more data as instructors, that when they looked at their DFW rates for their biology courses and statistics, they started to notice that certain populations had higher DFW rates than others, right? So the African-American students had higher DFW rates than others. So first geners, thinking about, and then they started to think really, like, even though they thought that they were being inclusive and they thought that they were providing, or that they were aware of these issues, they realized that even in their own classrooms, that they were seeing some of the same patterns, even though they were aware of those issues and didn't and thought that they were being inclusive. So they started to do studies about and adjustments to their teaching strategies, and they started to sort of track the effects of of these inclusive teaching strategies on their students, and then they broke out and did some more national work on this and studies. And so in 2019, they published in Chronicle of Higher Ed some of these this guide for how to do inclusive teaching. And so they said that mindset plus structure is inclusive teaching. So it's not necessarily, although you can bring in content that is more diverse and more sort of speaks directly to people's experiences, like Lena was suggesting, while you can do that in your classrooms, what they noticed was that it wasn't necessarily about the content so much as it was about the mindset of the instructor and the students and the structure that they provide in the class to help their students succeed. And I know we all just talked about what is inclusive teaching, what is inclusive pedagogy. You all know this. And so I know I'm speaking to the choir here a little bit, but these are the kinds of 5 things that they suggested for being more inclusive and engaged with your students. So be comfortable with silences in the classroom, provide those opportunities to let people think, let people process, let people kind of respond. Small groups, make them structured. Don't just break up into small groups and say, talk about this, right? Like actually provide the actual questions and provide them the structure for what they need to do while they're in small groups, what the outcome needs to look like, and give them that scaffolding. The anonymous participation, provide opportunities for people to respond to you without everybody hearing about it or knowing about it, right? I don't know about you guys. I have this anecdote. I was in grad school and we were, one of my classes was really keen on discussion board participation and, you know, wanting to kind of create this external conversation from class, and discussion boards are great. I use them in my classes now, but I was terrified to do discussion boards. And I was somebody who could talk in class, but I was just really anxious about that discussion board situation. And I think if the discussion board, you know, if we could do some sort of like strategy where you're allowing students who might be afraid to sort of put themselves down on print, right? Then, you know, that allows for more access to their participation as well. And I share that story with my students now because I want to create a kind of safe space for those discussion boards, right? That like, I understand that it can cause anxiety. This is kind of, you know, but this is why we do it and how we do it and what it does for us. Anyway, but having a growth mindset. So, you know, one of the authors of this book is a statistician and says that she used to be horrible at math. And so she often tells that story to her students to say like, this wasn't natural. I wasn't naturally gifted in this area, but I worked really hard and I was able to grow into it. And I became became good at it and passionate about it. So having that growth mindset and then creating personal connections, have authenticity and infuse that in your classroom a little bit. Now, I do want to say that that these practices, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the next section, but these practices don't work the same for every single person. And so I just want to put that out there right now. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But what they talk about when they talk about inclusive course design are, again, structuring your course and providing that structure so that everyone has access, which is, again, what you all talked about already, to the materials and to success and to learning. So inclusive course design means speaking less, which I'm going to stop speaking in a second, low stakes assessment, and making sure that you have more opportunities to assess, and making those lower. Using TTQ, which they call typical test questions, making explicit sort of what the typical test questions look like and walking students through how to respond. Pre and post assessments, not just assessing during when the actual course or classroom session is happening, and then clear expectations, and then connections to course content. And again, this goes back to what I think Lena was talking about in terms of making the course content relevant or exciting or interesting to your students. So all of these things, these strategies for course design, they were in this article, like I said, in 2018, but they just came out with the book to called Inclusive Teaching, Strategies for Promoting Equity in College Classroom. And they came out with that this summer, or late spring of 2022. And so it's I've read the book. It's really a nice way and a nice resource for you and your colleagues to really kind of walk through what inclusive teaching strategies there are, what the rationale for inclusive teaching is, how it's connected to rigor, how it improves the learning for all of our students, not just the ones that we, quote unquote, call unprepared or underprepared or underserved or minoritized, right? In all the different ways that we do. And so the inclusive teaching is best practices to get everybody on board and everybody moving along. It's good teaching. And it incorporates the good teaching strategies that I know that you all have used for a really long time. But what I like about this book is that it's reinforcing some of those things. It's adding new pieces of it from a post-pandemic world. And then it's also at the end of every chapter, providing activities for us to look at the courses that we already have taught and have designed. And it says, do not remove content. Right? Keep your content, keep what you need your students to know, but let's redesign the course and provide some structures that might be a little different from what you've been doing so that more of your students will succeed in learning the materials that you want them to learn. So again, it's that balance, right? So I love that they talk about structure and mindset, because your mindset as an educator is not like, some of my students are unprepared and they're not going to get it. No, instead, you're like, all of my students can grow, and we're going to try to structure this course so that all of my students can grow. Every single one of my students that's in my class will learn something in my class. And that mindset, believe it or not, like I think, oh, I must have had that mindset my whole life. No, I don't think I did. And it's not like I just got it in 2022. I've been developing that mindset plus structure kind of thing throughout my career. It's like what you learn, right? As you teach, the longer you teach, when you're in tuned to it, I think when you've had some maybe struggles in your own learning experience. But I think it's really important as a campus, as a university campus, to really think about how that mindset plus structure can really transform our teaching as a campus. And I think you all that are on this call are the leaders to help us do that. So did I do this one? Yes, I did. All right. So the challenge to this inclusive teaching, and this came out in February 2022, was academia has a lot to learn about inclusive teaching and its effects on instructors, right? So Chevelle Pittman and Thomas Tobin, and Thomas Tobin is that person that you see a lot when we're thinking about online education and like how to do it well. They wrote this article in Chronicle of Higher Ed that was referring back to the Hogan and Sathi article from 2019, and saying like they tried these strategies out, each of them from their different positionalities, right? So Tobin is an administrator, founding director of Teaching and Learning Center. Pittman is an associate professor, woman of color. They were in two different institutions in the Midwest, and they both did very similar strategies, the ungrading, thinking about various strategies that they used in their flexible due dates and other kinds of strategies that they use for inclusive teaching. And what they noticed was two radically different perceptions of how that worked in their classrooms, right? So Tobin maintained the authority of the classroom, and like they were, students were less apt to question the strategies. And I know, I think Andy was talking about this with the ungrading, right? Like the sort of initial resistance to that ungrading is really what Chevelle Pittman experienced, right? Which was the questioning, the sort of doubt, like, I'm not sure this is working. In the case of Dr. Pittman, it was like, I'm talking to your department head and to the dean about this, because it was just that kind of reaction, right? That strong reaction. So what it's important to remember is that inclusive pedagogy, the science, the theory of learning, of teaching inclusively, and the practice of teaching inclusively, the practice works differently for different people, right? So we know that that's the case. And so I love this article because it's pushing us to think better, I think, to think in a more inclusive way about us as instructors, as faculty, and the different responses that we might get to inclusive teaching, and the different relationships that we might need to have to maintaining the authority of our courses. What I love about the book, Inclusive Teaching, is that the book version of that inclusive teaching article attends to that difference of reception and thinks a lot about what it means to for the institution itself, for the institution at large, to support inclusive teaching practices, so that it's not something that looks like just one instructor is doing or that is not valued, and that instructional experimentation doesn't ding people in terms of their promotion and tenure, but rather that we create within the structures of our evaluation of teaching and our support of teaching and our awarding of teaching, these ability to experiment, the ability to take a chance and to do things in a more inclusive way. So I'm going to stop for a second. And actually, this is the end. But I'm going to stop for some conversation, and then after we have a little bit of conversation, I want to provide an invitation to you to continue this dialogue. But let's go ahead and stop share if Tanya's able. Okay. So, what are some ways that you all have included some inclusive teaching practices, and or let's start with what are some of the questions that you all have? And now that I can see the chat, we can just kind of read through them. Okay, more teaching awards. Yes, pass for excellence in teaching. Yes, I love all this. Personal connections are linchpin with inclusive teaching, 100%. We need to talk about impact factor beyond the machine numbers and recognize the impact factor of teaching well and how our students go out to impact the world. Love it. Man, I love you all. Okay. All right. So I realized that I did not clarify or provide structure for this conversation. So to provide structure, neurodiversity in the classroom is really important. Or is Don, you got your hand up.
So Tanya, I have a question rather than a contribution in that way. But
yeah.
I'm kind of wondering from your thinking about this, from your experience, from what you've seen, are there things that people think that they're doing that are good things that are actually really bad things?
Yes. Okay. So this is something that I'm so glad you asked this, Don. And I'm not going to say that they're bad things, but I'm going to say that there is a way that the emphasis on structure in both this text and in what I've read so far of the new classroom, and also just these articles. There's so many articles out there that from the moment that we did that COVID hit, like this became like a real emphasis in teaching and learning. What I call it is teaching and learning news, right? In the Chronicle of Higher Ed and Inside Higher Ed. The emphasis there has been on this inclusive pedagogy. But one of the things that I love about the emphasis of structure is that it pushes back against how people intuit inclusive teaching, which is to be a little bit like anything goes in the classroom, or right? That is what the intuition, when people hear inclusive teaching, they think, oh, they're just letting whatever happens, and all. That is actually worse for students than a structured course with clear expectations, with clear pathways to success, with more assessment versus less assessment. So this is why it grates on me when I hear this dichotomy, this false separation between rigor and inclusive pedagogy, because it's actually inclusive pedagogy. It actually makes clear the rigor of the course and shows pathways to obtaining the learning of this rigorous material, right? That they see your students not come, the students not come to the university to not learn. I mean, that's just, right? Like your students come into your classroom and they want to learn something new, right? So when people equate, so when you are able to show them the way to really produce excellent teaching and an excellent class structure that walks them through it, so that every single class, they know why they are doing that particular reading, and they know why they're doing it and what they're meant to take out of it. And then when they read it, they say, yes, I got it. Or when they read it, they say, no, I didn't get it, I need help. Because if they're just gonna, you're just gonna walk through and let willy-nilly happen in your classroom and, love on people, but not get them through the material, that is not inclusive teaching. You are going to have a group of students that fall behind, and those DFW rates are not going to improve, right? And so truly excellent teaching attends for that, making explicit the challenges that they're going to face, the rigor that they're going to experience in terms of excellence of or you know what, it's seeing themselves, making it so that they can see themselves as able to grow in that class, as able to grow. And that's the mindset plus the structure. Yeah. And so, Melissa, that's right. You're believing in them, right? You believe that your students can do this, but you're not going to go into the class and say, you all are so smart, you made it to college, let's go on this roller coaster ride, and oh, by the way, you don't get a seatbelt and we're going to do some twirlies. Like, that's not what you do. And so you can believe all you want, but if you don't provide the pathways and structure the course so that every single person succeeds, we aren't going to make a difference in how our students are learning. So it's the teaching, the structure, the mindset of the faculty, and it's the growth of the student, right? Okay. Oh, sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was just going to say too, I think that to that point as well, making very clear and explicit what our expectations are for our students and walking them through in a scaffolded capacity, like, this is what we're learning, this is why we're learning it, these are the steps that we're taking to get to where we want to go. I think that helps us a lot as teachers too, to recognize, like, what are the things that are important in this class? What do I want my students to know? And everything else is really just noise. Being able to focus on, like, did my student complete the objectives that I wanted them to complete? Not, do I like the style of their writing or not, but no, are they focused in on this? And this is something that I'm very passionate about as a linguist. Linguistic diversity is another aspect of this that is super important. And so we want to give feedback that's informative to our students, that's going to help them to be clear and to get their point across, but we don't want to tell them how to speak and how to write. We want to embrace that linguistic diversity. And it's okay if they're using structures that I wouldn't use in my dialect, but that are perfectly valid and understandable. As long as you're being clear, I'm like, great. If there's something that I say, like, oh, you might have this could be ambiguous, then I'll address that. But the ambiguity, not telling them how to use their language.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andy. And because our students, just like we did as students, I think, well, I guess I should pause. I think sometimes when we are in the profession of teaching at the university, It's because we were passionate. We were good students, right? And by good students is we knew how to make it through for some of us. But some of us didn't exactly, right? Or we did, but there was a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of like, I don't belong here because I don't speak academically. I don't, like, you just don't feel like you fit into the academy, right? And so, you take 3 years off between undergrad and grad school because you're like, I'm scared to become a professor. So that was me. But right. So like so there's like, so our students are coming with themselves, right? And I think it's important to recognize that. But however our students come, they are our students and we want them to grow. And so I think the way you framed that, Andy, was so nice because you're like, I want us to focus on what the learning is, what that learning goal is. And that's going to look different for each of our students in some ways. That doesn't mean that there's not a standard, there's not an expectation. We, like you said, we share that out up front and we provide those pathways and those various ways of getting there, right? The various ways. And I will say that the other misconception about inclusive teaching, or to go back to Dawn's question, like the other sort of inclusive teaching fails, I think, are that you don't have to prepare anything, or your inclusive classroom is just, every student's going to do what they're going to do, and there's no there is no sort of there's no structure. You're just going to go into the class and chat with your students, and just lecture to them, and you're not going to really figure out if they've got it or not. I just don't. That's the easy way to teach. I think inclusive excellence in teaching, and in our scholarship is very difficult. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Suzanne, for the words. Inclusive does not equal permissive. All right, Dawn, go ahead.
So I'm actually just pointing, there's a couple of questions in the chat, and kind of the point you were just making. Trevor Bell wonders, how do we break down that perception of others in terms of what inclusive teaching is versus isn't?
How do we break down the other people's perceptions of inclusive teaching?
So that people are their perceptions that they're gonna have to give up structure in order to be inclusive, when in actuality, that's not what it means. So how do we, I'm assuming, Trevor's asking, how do we break down those misconceptions? How do we promote inclusive teaching for those who might be resistant on false pretense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that it's these moments like this when we can start to look at the literature, the literature of teaching and learning that explains it and that unpacks it for us. Yes, Andy, it's having those conversations about it, but I think it's actually more about, and speaking from the perspective of teaching and learning, I think it is a training. I think we need to retrain ourselves as instructors, or to train, because I don't want to say retrain when some of us, the faculty, have never gone through formal training for this work. And I think that's something that we have to be also mindful of, is that our colleagues may not have had the training that we have sought out, whether that's professional development or actual like education training. And so I think that providing the campus with opportunities for that, not just in small moments, but maybe more structurally, it's going to be really important in changing that culture. But yes, having those conversations, having time, like Melissa just put on the chat, to have development for your teaching, thinking about how we incentivize that as a campus. And this is also something that I started thinking about in relationship to our 11-point plan for a more inclusive K-State. So this practice of reading about it, learning about it, and sharing strategies that we have for each other is really important. And can I share my screen one more time, just to share the invitation to continue this conversation, and so that you can share with your colleagues this opportunity? Maybe I think I shut down my keynote. It doesn't matter. So we're gonna do a reading group. on this from the TLC. So the final Fridays of the month, so September 30th, October 28th, and the Friday of finals week, get it? Final Fridays. That December 3rd, I think, is the date. So we're going to announce this on K-State Today. So just keep an eye out for it. But it is going to be I'm going to call it, like, let's call it TLC afternoon snack. Yeah. So for Fridays, I will bring cookies. We'll have this book, and we'll just read several chapters together and talk about how that can change our courses and our course structures. So if you, and I will say, or your colleagues in your different departments want to do this, let's get going. Let's do this, right? So we can have, you all are already gonna, some of you are gonna be speaking in professional development this year. And again, this is just tagging on to the professional development we have provided for years, right? Don and crew have been providing this professional development for years. But thank you, Noah. This is 2:30 on Fridays, 2:30 on Fridays. If you are teaching at 2:30 on Fridays, we can also do a little, maybe like coffee, breakfast coffee for this as well on the same day. So breakfast coffee and afternoon snack. I won't say afternoon tea because I'm not bringing tea, but I'm bringing cookies. So, and they're not home made either. So don't worry, it'll be catered. But yeah, let's get together and chat about inclusive teaching and how this can improve our a more inclusive K-State, our DEIB, all of that work. Somebody had a specific question up there. I recently teaching intro to gender and sexuality studies. Sometimes students turn in assignments which show a lot of learning is happening, but which use offensive or inappropriate language about race and gender. Yeah, does everyone have thoughts about how to support engagement and learning, but also suggest alternate language without coming across as overly pedantic or critical? That's a great question. I think that one of the things that I like to do at the beginning of the semester is to set the parameters and frameworks for how to communicate within our classroom space. So one of the things I do early on is to talk about what is okay and what is not okay in terms of our forms of engagement, not only from students to me and me to students, but also together. And we talk about that framing. And I've been more overt about doing that in the last 5 years. I've been more overt doing that since 2016 than I have my entire rest of my career as a faculty member or instructor of any kind. But I think it's really important to encourage civil engagement. It's really, and to be, because we have traumas that we are experiencing both outside the classroom, but in the classroom, in terms of having to read through some of those things that, yeah, like you said, you see the growth intellectually, but it's very painful in other ways. And how do you engage that? And I think it's okay to kind of reinforce those boundaries, those parameters as a sort of structure, to structure the course so that it limits. I don't think we can avoid it altogether, but I think that it teaches students how to communicate their growth and how to communicate in the settings that they're in. But other people might have solutions. Oh, Philip did. All right, perfect. You may not be aware of how you come across certain communities in the classroom when you blank, right? And so
I would chime in, sorry. I teach psychology of women, so I understand this. Students might use terms that they don't even know are offensive, so I like to come at it as an educational opportunity. Because as soon as I point out that that's insulting, they don't want to talk anymore. So I like to first day absolutely tell everyone we're as inclusive and we're educating everyone in this class with respect, so that hopefully it's not an intentional comment, but I come at it from, if you said something that could be offensive, we'll use it from an educational standpoint. And online platform is harder to group solve how to say it in a different way. But I would point out from that educational standpoint, just here's some alternate terminology, or we could self-reflect on why that terminology was used, why you use that terminology, where it came from. We all have social influences that teach us terminology, but here's some alternative language to use.
I love that. I love that. And I love, Philip, your template as well. I teach my courses on Latinx literatures or American literatures or cultural studies and theory. We talk about tough things every single semester, almost every single class, and I have to state that. I have to prepare my students for that as they come into my courses, and I do that. I just say this is difficult stuff to learn and talk about. It's difficult. We're going to have difficult conversations. So how can we enter into those, and how can it be safe for us? We make mistakes. We don't, And the other one I love is I always tell my students, there's no posturing in this class. You cannot come into my classroom for the semester and act like you know all the things that we're talking about, because that's not learning. We have to be humble. I do too. We have to be humble enough to learn together. And I think that that's something really important to establish as well. Because then what Natalie, you were saying, like if people make those gaffes and don't know, right, how they're doing hurts or offends, then we can be okay in that conversation.
So we are about up on time. So I want to thank Dr. Gonzalez for sharing her wonderful insights on all of this, and for also offering that opportunity to do the reading group on inclusive teaching. So thank you all for being part of this. I got a couple of reminders before we conclude. First of all, we do post-event surveys to see how these events are going. Please complete one. One of my TLC colleagues is going to drop that into the chat. I'll remind you, we do these every Wednesday at noon, and that we archive these events. So if you have a colleague who really would benefit from seeing this, this will probably be on our website by tomorrow, that they'll be able to watch that. Our event next week is going to be on allyship and anti-racism by Cody Walls and her team. And that will be the first start of a longer series to do anti-racism training here at K-State. So if you want to be here for that, that's great. We'll also be promoting it on our social media starting this afternoon to give you a little bit of an idea what's going on there. But I would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy weeks to be here. And thank you again, Dr. Gonzalez, so much for your insights.